The gaslight cast long shadows across Coal Bend's muddy streets as evening settled over the mining town. Smoke curled from the saloon chimneys, carrying the smell of burning pine and stale whiskey into the bitter winter air. Ephraim Holt stood in the shadows near Mitchell's wagon yard, his scarred face half hidden beneath the brim of his worn hat. The familiar ache of loneliness pressed against his chest as he watched the townspeople hurry past, careful to avoid his gaze. He was a ghost in this town, a mountain man who came down only for supplies, and they treated him like one. The creak of wagon wheels drew his attention to the coal yard. There, a heavy-set black woman hefted coal sacks that would strain two men. Her movements were steady and practiced, though exhaustion showed in the slight tremor of her arms. Sophia Mayfield. They called her the Mule Girl, but Ephraim had heard her real name whispered, usually just before an insult. He watched her every time he was in town. He saw the strength in her shoulders, but also the weariness in her eyes. It was a loneliness that mirrored his own. A group of miners stumbled from the Golden Nugget Saloon, their raucous laughter cutting through the evening quiet. One of them spotted Sophia and elbowed his companion. "Hey there, Mule Girl," he called out, voice thick with drink. "Ain't natural for a woman to do that kind of work." Sophia didn't pause in her labor. Instead, she began to hum, the sound carrying clearly across the yard. It was an old hymn, one Ephraim remembered from a childhood that felt like another man's life. Amazing Grace. Her voice held a strength and dignity that made his throat tighten. It was a shield and a weapon. The miners continued their taunts, but Sophia's humming never wavered. She moved another sack, then another, each motion deliberate and proud. Ephraim found himself unable to look away. There was something in her defiance that spoke to the wounded places in his own soul, the places that had given up fighting long ago. He watched her, and for a moment he felt a little less alone. But the night was far from over. Inside the Golden Nugget, voices grew louder. The sound of breaking glass shattered the evening air, followed by angry shouts. Ephraim tensed, recognizing the signs of trouble brewing. He'd seen it 100 times in towns like this. Drink and despair were a dangerous mix. Within moments, the saloon's bat-wing doors burst open as two men crashed through, fists flying. The brawl spilled into the street like water from a broken dam. More men joined the fray, their boots churning the mud as they traded wild punches. The fight surged toward the wagon yard, a chaotic wave of violence forcing Sophia to step back from her work. She moved too quickly, her tired legs betraying her. Ephraim saw the moment her strength finally failed. He saw her knees buckle, and she began to crumple toward the ground. He didn't think. He just moved. 3 long strides brought him to her side just as she started to fall. He caught her with gentle hands, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She was solid and warm against his chest, nothing like the delicate women he sometimes saw riding through town in fine carriages. "Let me go." Sophia's voice was weak but fierce. She struggled against his hold, her eyes bright with a mix of fury and fear. "I don't need your mockery, too." Around them, several brawlers paused to watch, their laughter cutting like knives. "Look at that! The beast got himself a prize," one of them sneered. Another added, "Ain't that a pretty pair?" Ephraim's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his scarred cheek. He kept his voice low and steady, meant only for her. "You're about to faint, Miss Mayfield. Let me help you somewhere warm." "Why would you want to?" The bitterness in her voice matched the pain in her eyes. "Nobody helps the Mule Girl without wanting something in return." The words slipped from Ephraim's lips before he could stop them, soft enough that only she could hear. "I'd trade everything for one night with you." Sophia went rigid in his arms, her face twisting with hurt and suspicion. "So that's it? You think because I'm tired I'll let you?" "No," Ephraim cut her off, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't place. "Not like that. Never like that." He began walking, careful but determined, away from the jeering crowd. "I see how you face them all, how you keep your dignity when they try to strip it away. I see your strength." She stopped struggling, but her body remained tense. "You're making fun of me. Everyone does." "I ain't much for joking, Miss Mayfield." Ephraim's steps were steady as he carried her, not toward the dark alleys, but toward the warm glow of Ma Wheeler's boarding house. I know what it's like, being marked different, being alone. His scars seemed to burn beneath her scrutiny as she studied his face. The lamplight from the boarding house porch threw the deep marks into sharp relief, reminders of the fire that had taken his family and left him an outcast. I only mean kindness, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. You deserve that much. More than that. Sophia's breathing had steadied, but confusion replaced the anger in her expression. Why would you care what I deserve? You don't know me. I know enough. Ephraim climbed the porch steps carefully. I know you sing hymns instead of cursing when they mock you. I know you share your bread with Widow Chen's children when you can barely feed yourself. I know you work harder than any 3 men in this town, and you do it with grace. The door opened before he could knock, spilling warm light onto the porch. Ma Wheeler stood in the doorway, her lined face creased with concern. Lord above, what's happened to the girl? Just tired, ma'am, Ephraim said quietly. She needs rest, and maybe some hot tea if you've got it. The older woman's eyes darted between them, taking in Sophia's exhaustion and Ephraim's careful hold. After a moment, she stepped back. Bring her through to the kitchen. I've got the stove going. As Ephraim carried Sophia into the warm kitchen, she finally spoke again, her voice so soft he almost missed it. I still don't understand why you'd say such a thing to me. About trading everything. He set her gently in a chair near the stove, making sure she was steady before stepping back. Because you make me believe there might still be good in this world, Miss Mayfield, he said, his voice raw. And that's worth everything I own. Ma Wheeler bustled around them, setting a kettle to boil and pulling out cups. Sophia stared at Ephraim, something uncertain and wondering in her gaze. The warmth of the kitchen began to bring color back to her cheeks, but she wrapped her arms around herself as if still cold. I've seen you too, Mr. Holt, she said finally, standing guard when the Miller boys were threatening old Joseph's store, leaving coins in Blind Pete's cup when you thought no one was looking. She paused, swallowing hard. Maybe there's already good in this world. It's just hiding in unexpected places. Ephraim's hands clenched at his sides, unused to such gentle words being directed his way. The kitchen's warmth seemed to seep into his bones, making him aware of how long he'd been cold, inside and out. Ma Wheeler set cups of steaming tea before them both, then tactfully disappeared into the front room, leaving them in a silence that felt more comforting than awkward. Outside, the sounds of the brawl had faded. Cole Bend settled into its usual evening quiet, broken only by distant laughter and the whistle of a late freight train. Inside Ma Wheeler's kitchen, two lonely souls sat with their tea, each wondering if they'd found something worth holding on to in a world that had shown them little kindness. But kindness couldn't protect them from what was coming. The walk to Ephraim's bunkhouse was quiet, broken only by the crunch of their boots on frozen ground and the distant howl of coyotes. Sophia walked under her own power now, though her steps were still unsteady. Ephraim stayed close, ready to catch her if she stumbled, but careful not to touch her without need. He was acutely aware of the whispers that would follow if anyone saw them. The bunkhouse stood apart from the other buildings, a weathered structure on the edge of town where the settlement gave way to scrubland. Moonlight caught on broken shutters, casting striped shadows across worn planks. It ain't much, he said, fumbling with the door latch, but it's warm enough once the fire's going. The door swung open with a protest of rusty hinges. Inside, darkness pressed close until Ephraim struck a match. The small flame illuminated a sparse room, a narrow bed against one wall, a pot-bellied stove, a rough table with a single chair. Everything was neat, though threadbare. Sophia stood just inside the doorway, her shoulders tight with tension. Her eyes darted around the room, marking exits, measuring distances. She was a survivor, and she never let her guard down. Ephraim noticed but said nothing. Instead, he moved to the stove, his movements slow and deliberate as he laid kindling. Make yourself as comfortable as you can, he said, not looking up from his task. Fire will catch quick. The kindling caught, and Ephraim fed smaller logs into the growing flames. Soon, welcome heat began to push back the winter chill. He filled a kettle with water from a barrel and set it on the stove. Sophia hadn't moved from her spot near the door. Her face was a mask of weariness. Here. Ephraim reached into a wooden box, pulling out half a loaf of cornbread wrapped in clean cloth. It's from yesterday, but still good. He set it on the table, then stepped back, giving her space. What do you want from me? Sophia's voice was steady despite her fatigue. Why bring me here? Ephraim's scarred face remained calm. Without a word, he walked to the corner where his rifle stood. Sophia tensed, her body coiled like a spring. But he simply picked up the weapon and laid it on the floor near the door, well out of his own reach. It was a gesture of trust more powerful than any words. You need rest, he said quietly. That's all. Take the bed. I'll sleep here. He gestured to the plank floor near the stove. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. On the table beside the cornbread, she noticed a Bible, its leather cover thick with dust. The sight seemed to surprise her more than his words. I don't understand you, Mr. Holt. Nothing to understand. He pulled a rough blanket from a trunk and spread it on the floor. You're tired. It's cold outside. Simple as that. The kettle began to whisper. Ephraim poured hot water into 2 tin cups, added dried mint leaves, and set one on the table near her. The other he kept for himself as he settled on his makeshift bed. Slowly, Sophia moved to the table. She sat stiffly, wrapping her work-roughened hands around the warm cup. The cornbread remained untouched. Ain't poisoned, Ephraim said mildly. Ain't much of a cook, but I can manage cornbread. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Seems you ain't much for reading either. She nodded toward the dusty Bible. Ephraim's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Used to, before. His hand rose unconsciously toward his scars, then dropped. Sleep now. You're safe here. He turned his face toward the wall, pulling the blanket over his broad shoulders. After a long moment, Sophia heard his breathing even out. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind whispered. She sat awake for a long time, sipping mint tea and watching the sleeping mountain man. Finally, exhaustion won. She eased onto the narrow bed, fully clothed, and fell into the deepest sleep she'd known in months. But safety was a fragile thing in Coal Bend. Morning came with roosters crowing and thin sunlight slicing through the gaps in the shutters. Sophia woke slowly, disoriented by the comfort of a mattress. She found herself alone, but fresh wood crackled in the stove, and the smell of cooking beans filled the air. The door opened, and Ephraim ducked inside, carrying an arm of split wood. He nodded at her, but said nothing, moving to stack the logs. Sophia sat up, smoothing her wrinkled dress. Why'd you do it? She asked abruptly. He continued stacking wood for several heartbeats before answering. Reckon I know what it's like. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. Being alone, having folks look at you and see only what's wrong. He straightened, one hand unconsciously tracing the rippled scars that marked his face. These ain't the worst scars I carry. Sometimes. Kindness from a stranger is the only medicine that helps. And that's all? Just kindness? Suspicion colored her tone, though softer than the night before. That's all. Ephraim moved to the stove, stirring a pot. Breakfast's ready if you're hungry. He filled 2 bowls, setting one before her. The beans were simple but nourishing. Sophia took a cautious bite, then another. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal she hadn't made herself. My father was a Buffalo soldier, she said suddenly between spoonfuls. Served with honor. Government promised him land near here for his service. Good land, with water rights. Ephraim paused mid-bite, listening intently. He died before he could claim it, her voice caught slightly. But the promise was real. I've seen the papers. Only I can't prove it now. Jed Purcell, he owns the mine. He says the land is his. Says my papers don't mean nothing without proof of my father's service. Ephraim's jaw tightened. He set his spoon down with careful precision. That's why I work so hard, Sophia continued, words coming faster now. Loading wagons, hauling coal, trying to save enough to hire a lawyer, maybe find someone who served with Papa. But they treat me like I ain't even human. She laughed bitterly. The mule girl. You're more human than most in this town, Ephraim said quietly. More dignity, too. She looked up sharply, searching his face for mockery. She found none. Dignity don't feed you, she said. Dignity don't give you land to call your own. No, Ephraim agreed, but it keeps you standing. He pushed his half-finished bowl aside. This land Purcell claims. Where is it? North of town near the creek bend. Good water there. Feeds right into his mine operations. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Ephraim stood, moving to the window. A man like Purcell, he don't just take one piece of land. Bet there's others he's cheated. I've tried. Nobody will help. They're all afraid of him. Maybe, Ephraim turned back to face her, but fear ain't the only power in this world. Sometimes justice just needs a quiet voice. Why would you care about my justice, Mr. Holt? Because I've seen what happens when good folks stay silent. His hand rose to his scars again, a gesture she was starting to understand. And I ain't staying silent no more. Afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the snow as they walked back toward Coal Bend. A bitter wind cut through their clothing. You don't have to go back to work today, Ephraim said. Give yourself time to rest. Rest won't pay for a lawyer, Sophia replied, her voice clipped. They approached the main street, and three men lounged against the general store's porch. Purcell's hired muscle. Sophia's steps faltered. The tallest one, Brady, straightened as they drew near. Well, look who's back, Brady called out. The mule girl, and seems she's found herself a scarred-up mule man to match. The other two laughed, blocking the walkway. Brady swaggered forward, spitting tobacco juice that landed deliberately at Sophia's feet. Ephraim's massive frame tensed, his hands curling into fists. Don't, Sophia whispered, grabbing his sleeve. They want trouble. The clip-clop of hooves interrupted them. Jed Purcell rode up on his expensive stallion, his fur coat gleaming. He looked down at them with calculated disdain. Miss Mayfield, he said, his voice smooth as poison. I thought we'd settled this matter of your alleged land claim. Nothing's settled, Mr. Purcell, Sophia replied evenly. Not while you're stealing what's mine. Purcell's pleasant expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. I'd be careful making accusations without proof. It would be a shame if certain elements had to be encouraged to move on. Ephraim stepped forward, placing himself between Sophia and Purcell's horse. He said nothing, but his presence was a wall of barely contained fury. Purcell merely smirked. You're new here, friend. Let me give you some advice. He touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. This town knows who its friends are. He wheeled his horse and rode away, his thugs falling in behind him. The onlookers quickly dispersed, leaving them alone in the trampled snow. Now you see, Sophia's voice was bitter, he owns this town. I'll help you, Ephraim said quietly. We'll find proof of your father's service. She laughed, a sound full of pain. You can't fight a mine baron with a good heart, Mr. Holt. He's got money, lawyers, men with guns. What have you got? Ephraim turned to face her, his scarred features grave. Maybe not much, he agreed. But I can stand. Stand for what? Justice ain't for folks like us. Then maybe it's time to change. His voice was low, but carried the weight of conviction. Your father earned that land with his blood. His service meant something. Your claim means something. Pretty word, Sophia said wearily. Actions change things, Ephraim countered. And I mean to act. A gust of wind swirled snow around them. Why? Why risk everything for a stranger's cause? He was quiet for a long moment. Because 18 years ago, I watched good people stay silent while evil men took what they wanted. Watched them turn away. I carry the price of that silence on my face. His hand rose to his scars. Never again. Sophia studied him, really looked at the man beneath the scars. She saw something that made her own spine straighten. Fine, she said finally, but we do it smart. No charging in. Purcell's too powerful. You have a plan? Maybe. She glanced around the empty street. Tonight, after dark, meet me behind the wagon yard. I'll tell you what I know. The afternoon sun hung low as Ephraim gestured toward a weathered clapboard church at the edge of town. Its white paint had long since faded to gray, but a simple cross stood proud atop the steeple. Reverend Amos, Ephraim said. He's different from most. Helps folks others won't look at twice. Sophia hesitated. I ain't been inside a church since Papa died, she admitted softly. Felt like God turned his back on us. The church door creaked open before she could say more. Reverend Amos Johnson stood in the doorway, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. Lord have mercy, the elderly preacher breathed, his eyes widening. If you ain't the spitting image of your mama, child. He descended the steps carefully. Samuel's girl, little Sophia. Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes. You knew my father? Knew him, Reverend Amos chuckled. Child, I was there when he took his oath for the 10th Cavalry. Proud day. Your daddy stood tall in that blue uniform. Come in. Come in. Wind's getting bitter. Inside, a pot-bellied stove radiated welcome warmth. Your daddy, the preacher continued, settling into a chair. He'd send letters when he could. Told me about the land grant he earned. 20 acres of good bottom land. Showed me the papers himself when he came home. Sophia leaned forward eagerly. The discharge papers? Do you still have them? Used to keep records for all our soldiers. Reverend Amos nodded. Birth records, marriage licenses, military papers. Kept them safe. His face fell slightly. But times got hard. Had to move the church twice. Things got lost, scattered. He stood with a grunt, moving to several wooden trunks in a corner. Still, might be something here. For the next hour, they searched through yellowed papers. Dust motes danced in the lamplight. Finally, Reverend Amos sat back. They ain't here. Sophia's shoulders slumped. Another dead end. The Reverend was quiet for a moment, thinking. Though, might be something in the Bible box. We kept important papers there, too, tucked between the pages sometimes. Where is it? Sophia asked, hope rekindling. The preacher's expression turned troubled. Loaned it to Reverend Whitlock over at the White Church last month. He wanted to see the old family records. He shook his head. Haven't been able to get it back yet. He keeps saying he'll return it, but another dead end. But this one felt different. It felt personal. Night had fallen by the time they left. The winter sky was scattered with hard, bright stars. When they reached Ephraim's cabin, Sophia paused. I should go back to my boarding room. Stay, Ephraim said quietly. It's warm here. Safe. He built up the fire while she hung her shawl on a peg. The cabin was sparse but neat. Ephraim settled on a stool near the fireplace, pulling out a whetstone and several knives that needed sharpening. The familiar rhythm of steel on stone reminded Sophia of her father cleaning his cavalry carbine. Without thinking, she began to hum softly. An old hymn. Amazing Grace. To her surprise, a deep voice joined hers, rough and unpracticed. Ephraim didn't look up, but his shoulders had tensed. Instead of laughing, Sophia moved closer, placing her hand gently on his wrist. The touch made him freeze. When he finally looked up, his eyes held such raw pain that her breath caught. I ain't sung since. He swallowed hard. Since the raid that took my family. 18 years ago now. That's where the scars came from. He nodded once, sharp and quick. Couldn't save them. Couldn't even read the Bible at their funeral. Never learned how. Understanding dawned. The dusty Bible she'd seen that first morning. Unread, not from lack of faith, but lack of learning. I could teach you, she offered. Papa made sure I learned my letters. Said education was freedom. Ephraim's hand stilled. Why would you do that? Same reason you're helping me, because it's right. She met his gaze steadily. You help me fight for my land, I'll help you read the good book. Deal? For a long moment, only the fire broke the silence. Then Ephraim set aside his knife and held out his hand. His palm was calloused, his grip careful. Deal, he said softly. She could see now what Reverend Amos had meant about help coming in unexpected ways. This scarred mountain man, with his gentle hands and broken hymns. Maybe he was an answer to a prayer she'd stopped believing would be heard. Morning came with a bitter chill. Frost painted every fence post with delicate white crystals. Sophia pulled her worn shawl tighter as she waited by Ephraim's wagon. He emerged from the stable leading 2 horses. He had hitched them to his weathered wagon, which creaked under the weight of a few supplies. Ready? He asked, offering his hand to help her onto the wooden seat. She accepted, conscious of sitting so close their shoulders nearly touched as they set off toward the white church on the north end of town. The pastor's house stood apart from the church proper, a neat two-story building with lace curtains. Reverend Whitlock was already on his porch, wrapped in a thick coat. He looked up as the wagon approached, his expression cooling when he spotted Sophia. "Can I help you?" Ephraim stepped down first. "We've come for the Bible box," he said, his voice low but firm. "The one you borrowed from Reverend Amos." "Church property," Whitlock replied dismissively, closing his book. "I'm still examining the records." "It ain't your church's property," Sophia spoke up, lifting her chin. "Those are our people's records, our history." The pastor's lips thinned. "Young woman, I don't believe you're in any position to make demands." Ephraim took a step forward, his massive frame seeming to block out the morning sun. His scarred face was calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Reverend," he said quietly, "we ain't leaving without that box." Whitlock's gaze darted between them, lingering on Ephraim's broad shoulders and the rifle still visible in the wagon. After a long moment, he sighed. "Very well. Wait here." He disappeared inside, returning moments later with a carved wooden box. He handed it to Ephraim with obvious reluctance. Back in the wagon, Sophia held the box in her lap, her fingers tracing the worn edges. But when they opened it, their hopes plummeted. Old church bulletins, faded hymnals, a few dried flowers. No discharge papers, no proof. Her shoulders slumped. Another dead end, and this one felt intentional. Ephraim clicked his tongue at the horses, guiding them onto a trail that wound through snow-dusted pines. "We'll find another way," he said softly, but Sophia could see the frustration in the set of his jaw. Around midday, they stopped in a small clearing. As they ate a simple meal of cornbread and dried apples, Sophia pulled a small Bible from her pocket. "No better time to start your lessons," she said, opening to the Book of Psalms. Ephraim stared at the page like it might bite him. "Been so long." She pointed to the first line. "Just sound it out. Slow. One step at a time." His finger traced the words hesitantly. "The Lord is my..." He stumbled over shepherd, his face flushing. "Shepherd," Sophia broke it down gently. They worked through the verse, Ephraim growing more frustrated with each stumble until he swore under his breath. "Ain't no use. Too old to learn." Sophia laughed, a sound of genuine warmth. "Lord above, you sound just like my little brother." When Papa was teaching him, he'd get so mad he'd throw the book clear across the room. The laughter seemed to break something loose in Ephraim. The tension in his shoulders eased. "What happened to him?" "Gone to glory with Papa," she said softly. "Fever took them both 3 winters back." She poked at the fire with a stick. "Papa used to pray under the stars when he was with the Buffalo Soldiers. Said even after marching all day, he'd find strength in the Psalms." Ephraim was quiet for a long time. "I prayed once," he finally said, "when Ma was dying. Begged God to spare her." His hand unconsciously touched the scars on his face. After that, seemed no point. Sophia reached over, her fingers brushing his arm. "Maybe that's why the Lord brought us together, so you could find your way back." Their eyes met across the dying fire, and something shifted in the space between them. A possibility. As they packed up, defeated but not broken, a new thought struck Ephraim. What if Whitlock didn't return the right box on purpose? What if he was hiding something? The dead end suddenly looked more like a locked door, and they had to find the key. The first pale light of dawn crept over the mountains. They guided their wagon back to Reverend Amos's small church. The elderly preacher was already awake, tending the stove. "Welcome back, children," he said, straightening slowly. "I see the Bible box didn't hold what we hoped." Sophia shook her head, clutching the empty box. "Just bulletins and old hymnals, Reverend." The preacher's face grew thoughtful. "There might be one more chance," he said after a long moment. "I've been praying on it all night, trying to remember." He gestured for them to sit. "Years back," he continued, "there was a soldier, Private Harlan McBride. He served with your father's unit, Sophia. A good man. He used to help me keep records. Important papers." Sophia leaned forward, hope lighting her eyes. "Did he have Papa's discharge papers?" "Could be," Reverend Amos nodded slowly. "He lives out at the Wilson Ranch now, about 2 miles past town. Been sick these past months." Consumption, they say. He sighed heavily. If anyone might know where those papers ended up, it'd be Harlan. Ephraim stood immediately. Then we'd best get moving. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks as they set out. The cold air stung their faces, but Sophia barely noticed. After they'd cleared the town, she pulled out her Bible. Might as well make use of the time. Ephraim's hand tightened on the reins, but he nodded. The Lord is my light and my salvation, he read carefully. Whom shall I fear? Sophia guided him gently, her finger tracing under each word. When he successfully read an entire passage without help, pride bloomed warm in his chest. You're learning quick, Sophia said, smiling. Papa would have liked teaching you. The winter sun hung low on the horizon by the time they spotted smoke rising from a small cabin. As they drew closer, they could see it was well maintained. But there was a loneliness about it, something that spoke of illness and waiting. Ephraim knocked firmly on the door. No answer came, but they could hear movement inside. Private McBride, Sophia called softly. It's Sophia Mayfield, Thomas Mayfield's daughter. A weak voice responded. Come in. The cabin's interior was dim, thick with the sharp smell of medicine. A figure lay in a narrow bed against the far wall. Private Harlan McBride was a ghost of a man, his skin nearly as pale as his sheets, but his eyes were bright and alert. Thomas Mayfield's girl, he wheezed, struggling to sit up. Lord above, you're the spitting image of him. Sophia hurried to his bedside. You served with my father? Proud to say I did. Finest soldier I ever knew. He began to cough, a wet, rattling sound. When it subsided, his eyes found Sophia again. Your pa trusted me with his discharge papers, he said, each word deliberate. Wanted them kept safe. Sophia's hands twisted in her skirt. Do you still have them, sir? Harlan's face fell. I'm sorry, girl. I did keep them safe for years. But when I got sick... He paused, gathering strength. I couldn't trust myself to hold on to them. Gave them to the church for safekeeping. The Bible box? Ephraim asked quietly. No. Harlan shook his head. Though that's where they were meant to go. I remember now. I was fevered that day, confused. Tucked them in an envelope. Slipped it behind the altar boards. His thin fingers plucked at the blanket. Meant to tell someone, but the sickness took hold. Been eating at me, knowing I failed your pa's trust. They hadn't been lost or stolen. They'd been hidden. Hidden in the one place no one would think to look. The pale winter sun crept over the mountains. Sophia and Ephraim left Private McBride sleeping peacefully, a fresh pot of broth warming by his bedside. The wagon wheels creaked through the morning silence as they raced back to town, hope thundering in their chests. Reverend Amos waited at the church steps. He unlocked the heavy wooden doors, and they stepped into the hushed sanctuary. Morning light streamed through frosted windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. The altar's original to the building, Reverend Amos explained, leading them forward. Been here 20 years or more. Ephraim knelt beside it, running callous fingers along the seams. Here, he muttered, finding a spot where the wood gave slightly. He pulled a knife from his boot and worked it carefully into the gap. Sophia held her breath. The board creaked, then lifted away. Ephraim set it aside and peered into the dark space beneath. There's something. He reached in, stirring up years of dust. When he withdrew his hand, he held a leather envelope, its surface gray with age. Sophia's hands shook as she took it. The leather was soft, worn smooth by time. She opened the flap with careful fingers. Inside she found papers, yellowed but intact. As she unfolded them, her father's name jumped out at her in faded ink. Thomas Mayfield. These are them, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Papa's discharge papers, just like Private McBride said. Her eyes raced over the documents. Everything's here, his service records, the land grant authorization, all of it. Reverend Amos placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The Lord's hand is surely upon this, he said softly. He ain't forgot you, child. Sophia clutched the papers to her chest, tears spilling down her cheeks. All those years of mockery and doubt. Here was proof, solid in her hands. She was Thomas Mayfield's daughter, and that land was rightfully hers. Ephraim stood quietly beside her, his presence steady and warm. She caught him looking at her with something soft in his eyes, something that made her heart skip. "Reckon we ought to get these somewhere safe," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They thanked the Reverend and headed out into the brightening day. The papers were carefully wrapped and tucked inside Sophia's coat, close to her heart. The day passed in a blur. They visited the land office to file notice of her claim. By the time dust settled, they were both exhausted but triumphant. "Come have supper," Ephraim said as they neared his cabin. Inside, he built up the fire while Sophia stirred a pot of stew. The familiar tasks felt different, charged with new meaning. This was the beginning of something else. They ate in comfortable silence. After they stayed at the table, neither wanting the evening to end. "Why do you live up here alone?" Sophia asked finally. Ephraim was still for a long moment. "Tried living other ways," he said at last. "Even tried marriage once, before the war." His hand touched the scar on his cheek. "But after, well, some wounds ain't just on the outside. She couldn't abide what I'd become." Sophia reached across the table and took his scarred hand in hers. "Scars just mean you survived," she said firmly. "Ain't nothing shameful in that." His eyes met hers, full of wonder and something like hope. They sat there long into the evening, talking quietly of dreams. Ephraim spoke of building a snug house on her land, with a proper stone chimney and windows facing the sunrise. Sophia listened, letting herself imagine it, a home of her own, built by these strong, gentle hands. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. But beginnings are the most fragile things of all. Dawn brought heavy clouds, promising snow. Ephraim watched the first flakes drift down as Sophia wrapped her father's papers carefully in oilcloth. Each fold was an act of prayer. "Best get moving before it gets too thick," Ephraim said, spreading an extra blanket across the wagon seat. Sophia climbed up beside him, the precious packet tucked securely inside her coat. She sat with her back straight, her chin lifted. No longer the exhausted labor girl, but a woman claiming her birthright. As they followed the winding road, the snowfall grew heavier. "Might as well practice while we ride," Sophia said, pulling out the small Bible. Ephraim's finger traced beneath each line. "The Lord is my shepherd," he began, his voice rough but determined. "I shall not want." His halting voice grew stronger as they continued down the road, Sophia's clear laughter ringing out whenever he stumbled. By the time they reached Coal Bend's outskirts, snow was falling steadily. People gathered on the boardwalks, watching their approach. Whispers followed them, the mountain man and the labor girl, riding together in broad daylight. The courthouse stood at the center of town. Ephraim helped Sophia down, and together they climbed the steps. Inside, the clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up with mild surprise. His eyes narrowed when he recognized Sophia. "Can I help you?" Sophia stepped forward, unwrapping the oilcloth. "I've come to file my land claim," she said clearly. "These are my father's discharge papers from the Buffalo Soldiers, along with his land grant authorization." The clerk took the papers with obvious reluctance. His eyes moved back and forth across the yellowed pages. The silence stretched thin. Finally, he cleared his throat. "These appear to be legitimate," he admitted, though his tone suggested he'd hoped otherwise. "However, Mr. Purcell has expressed interest in this particular tract of land. He's likely to contest any claim." Sophia straightened her shoulders. "Let him contest. These papers prove the land is mine by right. My father earned it, and I aim to claim what's mine." The clerk's pen scratched across the official forms. When he finished, he handed her a receipt with obvious distaste. They were nearly to the door when it burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and the broad figure of Jed Purcell. Behind him loomed three of his hired men, their eyes hard as gunmetal. Purcell's face was red with more than just cold. "Well, well," he drawled, blocking their path. "If it ain't the mule girl and her pet mountain man," his eyes fixed on the receipt in Sophia's hand, "waving around scraps of paper trying to steal what ain't yours." "These ain't scraps," Sophia said, her voice steady. "These are legal documents proving my father's claim." Purcell's laugh was ugly. Legal documents from a Buffalo soldier? He spat the words like poison. That land's meant for proper folk, not. That's enough, Ephraim cut in, his voice low but carrying the weight of thunder. Purcell turned his attention to Ephraim, his eyes glittering with malice. You're making a mistake, mountain man. I break mules every day. Won't take much more effort to break you. His hired men shifted, their hands drifting toward their gun belts. Ephraim's whole body tensed, ready for violence. But then he felt Sophia's hand slip into his, warm and sure. The touch centered him, reminded him of something bigger than pride or anger. Without a word, he gripped her hand and led her past Purcell's sneering face, out into the swirling snow. They had won the first battle, but they had just declared war. 3 days passed like molasses in winter. Word of Sophia's official land claim spread through Coal Bend faster than a prairie fire. The morning sun cast long shadows as Ephraim and Sophia made their way to the general store for supplies. Inside, the store's warmth carried whispers sharp as broken glass. Two women in fine wool coats bent their heads together. That girl thinks she can take on Jed Purcell, one said, her laugh tinkling like ice. Where does she get the nerve? Probably thinks that mountain man of hers will save her, the other replied. Though Lord knows what he sees in her. Ephraim's muscles tensed, his scarred face darkening. He took one step toward them, but Sophia's hand found his arm. When he turned, her eyes held his. Steady, calm, unshaken. The simple touch grounded him. She simply gathered their supplies, laid her coins on the counter and said, Much obliged, her voice carrying across the whispers. She walked out with her head high, Ephraim following like a chastened shadow. That evening, they met with Reverend Amos to prepare for the inevitable hearing. The law may be on your side, and the elderly preacher said, but hearts need moving too. He turned to Sophia. Your father never missed a chance to lift his voice in praise. Perhaps you might do the same before the court. Sophia's hands twisted in her skirts. Sing? In front of everyone? Let them hear the faith that runs in your blood, Reverend Amos urged. While they talked strategy, Ephraim sat with his borrowed Bible, lips moving silently over familiar verses. I aim to speak for her, he said suddenly, not with fists this time, with words, with truth. They worked late into the evening. Outside, snow began falling again, thick and heavy. A storm rolled in, trapping them for days. Wagons stopped running, and the town grew quiet under its white blanket. They found themselves confined to Ephraim's cabin, watching the snow pile higher. They made good use of the time. Sophia continued Ephraim's reading lessons, her patience never wavering. In turn, Ephraim taught her the skills of survival, how to split wood with clean, efficient strokes, how to set snares, reading animal tracks in the snow. The evenings drew them closer. One night, as snow whispered against the windows, Sophia began to hum an old hymn. Without thinking, Ephraim found himself humming along, his deep voice rough but earnest. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, she sang softly, encouraging him to join in. That saved a wretch like me, he managed, the words coming back from a distant childhood. Outside, wolves cried across the snowy hills. But inside the cabin, something warm and hopeful was growing. Reverend Amos managed to visit during a lull, bringing news. The hearing was set for the following week, weather permitting. That night, Sophia stood at the window watching the snow. Ephraim came to stand beside her. You reckon we're ready? She asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. Reckon we're as ready as we'll ever be, he finally said. Got truth on our side. Got faith too. Thanks to you. She turned to him, studying the scars that no longer seemed so harsh. And I've got strength thanks to you, she replied. Strength to stand my ground. They had found something in these snowbound days, a partnership forged in shared work and quiet moments. They were prepared to face whatever came with the dawn. They just didn't know what it would be. Dawn broke pale and cold. The snow had finally eased, leaving behind a pristine blanket that sparkled in the early light. Ephraim stood in his doorway, while Sophia gathered her things. She carefully tucked the precious envelope of papers into her coat pocket, patting it twice for reassurance. They set off down the trail, the wagon wheels cutting clean tracks through unmarked snow. Morning sun caught ice crystals in the air, making them sparkle. They were halfway to town, just where the trail curved around a stand of bare aspens, when Ephraim spotted movement in the trees. His body tensed. "Something's wrong," he started to say, but gunfire cut him off. The crack of pistols split the morning quiet. Smoke bloomed between the trees. Ephraim threw himself sideways, shielding Sophia with his body as bullets splintered the wagon seat. "Get down!" he shouted. But Purcell's men were already emerging from the trees. 6 of them, faces hard with cruel purpose. Rifles and pistols, trained steady. Ephraim reached for his own gun, but a rifle butt caught him across the temple before he could draw. The impact sent him sprawling. He hit the frozen ground hard, stars exploding behind his eyes. "No!" Sophia's scream cut through his daze. "Leave him be!" Through blurred vision, he saw 2 men drag her from the wagon. She fought like a wildcat, but they were too strong. A third man reached into her coat pocket, tearing out the envelope. "Looking for these?" he sneered, holding them up. "Your precious proof." "Please," Sophia begged, her voice breaking. "Those are all I have." The man just laughed. He pulled out a match, struck it against his boot, and touched the flame to the corner of the papers. The documents caught quickly, curling and blackening. Sophia's scream was raw with despair. She lunged, but the men held her back, forcing her to watch as her father's legacy turned to ash. The fragments drifted down to the snow like black butterflies. Ephraim tried again to rise, but another blow sent him crashing back down. His head spun, blood pooling beneath him, staining the snow crimson. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Sophia's sobs turn into something else, the familiar melody of a hymn, wavering but defiant. "Shut her up!" one of the men growled. They grabbed her arms roughly, dragging her toward town. She didn't fight now. She walked with her chin high, tears freezing on her cheeks as she continued to hum. The hymn floated back to Ephraim, growing fainter as they paraded her down the main street. Miners emerged to watch, their jeers joining the morning air. "Mule Girl's getting what she deserves. Ain't so high and mighty now." But still Sophia walked, her hymn rising above their mockery. Ephraim could only watch helplessly as they disappeared inside the jailhouse. The heavy door slammed shut with terrible finality. Snow began falling again, soft and silent, already starting to cover the blood where he lay. All was lost. For a long time he couldn't move. The cold seeped into his bones. Finally, survival instinct took over. He began to crawl, dragging himself toward his cabin, leaving a trail of blood. It took over an hour. By the time he reached his door, his clothes were frozen stiff. He managed to push inside, collapsing onto the floor beside the cold hearth. Despair pressed down on him. He had failed her, failed to protect her, failed to save her father's papers. He had failed to stand against evil when it mattered most. He lay there as darkness gathered in the corners of his cabin. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and grief, "I ain't asked you for nothing in years. But please, please don't let this be the end." Only silence answered. Through the window, he could see the jailhouse lights glowing in the distance. Somewhere in there, Sophia was alone. The thought should have driven him to action, but his body refused to move. Hours passed. The cabin grew colder. Ephraim drifted in and out of consciousness, tormented by visions of Sophia's face as the papers burned. Night fell completely. Through the walls came the sound of wolves hunting, their howls mocking his helplessness. He pressed his forehead against the rough wooden floor. All their hope felt like ashes in his mouth. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry." Hope, that fragile thing they had nurtured together, seemed as distant now as the stars hidden behind the storm clouds. The night pressed cold against Ephraim's cabin windows. He lay where he had fallen, fever building as infection set in. In his delirium, he saw the papers burning, heard Sophia's scream echoing. Maybe it would be easier to let the darkness take him. Across town, in the jailhouse's stark confines, Sophia sat straight-backed on a wooden bench. Rather than surrender to fear, she lifted her voice in song. The hymn started soft but grew stronger, pushing past the stone walls to float into the street. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Her voice carried clear and true. A few passers-by paused, heads cocked to listen. Reverend Amos walked slowly down the boardwalk. When Sophia's song reached him, he stopped. The elderly preacher's face creased with pain and purpose. That saved a wretch like me. The Reverend noticed others listening now. A shopkeeper's wife dabbed her eyes. Two miners removed their hats, shame darkening their features. The song was working its way into hearts long hardened by prejudice and greed. Back in his cabin, Ephraim drifted deeper into fever dreams. Death felt close, its shadow falling across him. Then carried on the night wind came the faintest thread of song. I once was lost, but now am found. Something stirred in Ephraim's chest. The melody sparked a memory of his mother's voice singing this same hymn. Was blind, but now I see. Sophia's voice grew stronger, as if calling directly to him. His hands clenched into fists. He would not die here alone, not while she still sang. With a groan that was half prayer, half curse, he dragged himself to his knees. The room spun violently, but he held on. Bracing himself against the wall, he forced his legs to take his weight. Lord, he rasped, voice cracking, I ain't worthy to ask you nothing. Just, just give me strength to stand with her, to do what's right this once. He took one stumbling step, then another. The night air hit him like a slap when he finally made it outside. He staggered down the path, following the sound of Sophia's hymn like a lifeline. He fell several times, but each time forced himself back up. By the time he reached Reverend Amos's parsonage, his legs were shaking uncontrollably. He managed 3 weak knocks before collapsing against the door. It opened almost immediately. Good Lord! Amos caught Ephraim as he pitched forward. Martha, come quick! Together they half carried him inside. Martha's hands were gentle as she cleaned his head wound. Foolish man, she clucked. You could have died out there. Still might, Ephraim mumbled. Not under my roof, she declared firmly. Reverend Amos sat heavily in his chair. You aim to stand with her at the hearing. It wasn't a question. Ephraim nodded, wincing. Good, the preacher said, but not for revenge. That path leads only to more darkness. Then for what? For truth, Amos leaned forward, his gaze intense. For justice tempered with mercy. That girl in there, she's singing about amazing grace. Grace that saves the lost, that gives sight to the blind. Maybe that's what this town needs more than anything, to have its eyes opened. Ephraim lay silent, tears sliding down his temples. I failed her, he confessed roughly. No, Amos shook his head. You're here, aren't you? Despite your wounds, despite your fear. That's not failure. That's faith taking root again. Martha brought him broth. Outside, Sophia's voice still carried on the night air, unwavering. Was blind, but now I see. Dawn began to paint the sky. Ephraim's fever had broken. He sat up slowly. The hearing's at noon, Reverend Amos said quietly. Ephraim nodded. His path was clear. He would stand beside Sophia, not with fists or fury, but with truth. Whatever came, she would not face it alone. The January sun rose bright and brittle over Coal Bend. Inside the courthouse, townsfolk filed in, their whispers filling the room. Heard they burned her papers right in front of her. That mountain man nearly died defending her. The doors groaned open. 2 deputies led Sophia Mayfield inside, her wrists bound with iron cuffs. Though her dress was wrinkled, she held her head high, her eyes steady and clear. The doors opened again. Reverend Amos entered, supporting Ephraim Holt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bandages wrapped his head, dark bruises mottling his face. Each step seemed to cost him, but he remained upright. At the front, Jed Purcell sat with 2 lawyers, smirking. Judge Harrison entered. All rise. Sophia stood straight. Ephraim swayed slightly but stayed standing. Be seated, the judge commanded. We are here to review the land claim of Miss Sophia Mayfield. Purcell's lawyer rose. Your Honor, given the unfortunate destruction of the alleged military papers, we move to dismiss this claim immediately. Before the judge could respond, a soft sound filled the room. Sophia had begun to sing. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. The whispers died. Even the judge paused. Her voice grew stronger, filling every corner. That saved a wretch like me. When the last note faded, silence held. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. While I appreciate the sentiment, Miss Mayfield, this is a court of law. We require evidence. Then I'll testify. Reverend Amos stepped forward. I knew Thomas Mayfield. I saw those discharge papers myself, Your Honor. Saw him granted that land. Hearsay, Purcell's lawyer objected. Without documentation. Wait! A new voice called from the back. The crowd parted as two men carried Private Harlan McBride into the courtroom on a stretcher. His face was gray, but his voice was clear. I can speak to those papers, too. The judge leaned forward. You are Private Harlan McBride, formerly 1st Cavalry. He coughed wetly. I held those papers in trust. Military discharge and land grant. Both signed and sealed proper. More convenient stories, Purcell scoffed. Where are these papers now? Your men burned them, Sophia's voice rang with quiet dignity. Made sure I watched them turn to ash. Murmurs rose. I got something to say, a thin woman stood. Name's Mary Whitaker. Last winter, my Thomas took sick. Miss Sophia shared her bread with my children. Never asked nothing in return. Another woman rose. She helped me birth my baby when no one else would come. More voices joined in, one after another. Tales of quiet kindness. Shared meals, gentle words, helping hands. Purcell's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, these emotional appeals have no bearing. They speak to character, the judge cut in, which bears directly on the credibility of testimony. Continue. Ephraim pushed himself away from the Reverend's support. He drew a small Bible from his coat. The room hushed. Ain't much of a reader, he said roughly. Miss Sophia's been teaching me. Reckon these words need saying now. His voice cracked but held steady as he read. Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. He closed the Bible. That land was promised for her father's service. Man gave his life defending this territory. His daughter deserves what's rightfully hers. If there's justice in this court, she'll have her due. Sophia pressed her bound hands to her mouth, tears flowing. Judge Harrison studied the room. I have heard significant testimony regarding both the existence of these papers and Miss Mayfield's character. Given the irregular circumstances of their destruction, I will take time to review all evidence. This court will recess until tomorrow morning, when I will deliver my ruling. The gavel cracked. As the crowd stirred, Ephraim's legs finally gave out. Reverend Amos caught him. Sophia tried to go to him, but the deputies held her back. Time to return to your cell, miss. Her eyes stayed on Ephraim as they led her away. Hope and fear tangled together like shadows on snow. Snow began falling again as afternoon shadows lengthened. The crowd lingered in the street, voices low and urgent. Jed Purcell paced the boardwalk, his face red with fury. This is robbery, he shouted to anyone who would listen. That land's been properly deeded to my mining operation. Your mining operation's been stealing water rights for years, someone called from the crowd. On a bench near the courthouse doors, Sophia sat, her lips moving in silent prayer. Beside her, Ephraim leaned heavily against the wall, his eyes never leaving her face. Miss Sophia, he said softly, I need to tell you something. She turned concerned. You should be resting, Mr. Holt. Please, his scarred hands twisted together. All my life, I've been keeping to the mountains. Figured a man marked up like me, broken inside and out. Figured I wasn't worth nobody's time, especially not a woman's. He drew a shaky breath. Especially not yours. Sophia's expression softened. She reached out and covered his weathered hands with her own. Mr. Holt, Ephraim, those scars don't make your worth. The good Lord does that. But I've seen your heart these past days, seen you stand up when others looked away, seen you learn scripture just to speak truth. Her voice grew gentle. Those marks you carry, they're proof you survived. There's strength in that, beauty even. Ephraim's breath caught. He stared at their joined hands as if they were something precious and strange. The courthouse doors creaked open. Judge Harrison's ready to deliver his ruling, the bailiff announced. People flooded back inside. Lantern light caught the judge's silver hair as he settled behind his bench. The room fell silent. This court has carefully considered all testimony, Judge Harrison began. While the destruction of the original papers is troubling, the law recognizes that documentation is not the only form of proof. Purcell shifted forward, jaw clenched. We have heard from multiple credible witnesses who personally viewed these documents, the judge continued, including a fellow veteran. Moreover, the pattern of behavior surrounding their destruction suggests a consciousness of guilt on the part of those who wish to suppress Miss Mayfield's claim. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Therefore, it is the finding of this court that the testimony provided is sufficient to establish the validity of Thomas Mayfield's original land grant. He lifted his gavel. The South Quarter section is hereby restored to his rightful heir, Miss Sophia Mayfield. The crack of the gavel was lost in a surge of cheers. Reverend Amos's rich "Hallelujah" rang to the rafters. Sophia swayed, her knees going weak with relief. Ephraim caught her, drawing her against his chest as tears spilled down her cheeks. "This is an outrage!" Purcell's roar cut through the celebration. He stormed toward the bench. "You'll regret this, all of you! Deputies!" Judge Harrison's voice cracked like winter thunder. "Escort Mr. Purcell from my courtroom, and if he makes any further threats, you have my permission to house him in the jail until he cools his temper." The deputies moved forward. Purcell backed away, hatred twisting his features. "This isn't over," he spat, then turned and stalked out. As darkness settled, warmth spilled from Reverend Amos's home. Sophia sat by the fire, exhaustion finally showing. Ephraim knelt beside her chair. "You did it," he said softly. "Your father's land is yours again." She reached out, touching his cheek. "We did it. You stood beside me when I needed strength most." "I'll never forget that, Ephraim Holt. Never." He caught her hand, pressing it to his scarred cheek. "Miss Sophia," he whispered, voice breaking, "I'd trade everything for one night with you." The words that had once sparked hurt now carried a different weight. Sophia saw the truth in his eyes. Not desire, but a plea for belonging. She twined her fingers with his, a gesture as binding as any vow. "No need for trading," she murmured. "What's freely given is worth more." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Coal Bend in clean white silence. But inside, they held fast, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come not in winning land, but in finding a home in another's heart. Sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Sophia stood at the edge of her land. The quarter section stretched before her, rolling down to where Cottonwood Creek cut through the valley. Beside her, Ephraim shifted his weight, a hammer slung over his broad shoulder. "Right there," he said, pointing to a gentle rise near 3 tall pines. "That's where we'll build, high enough to stay dry, sheltered from north winds." His voice grew soft. "I'll make you a proper home, Miss Sophia. Windows facing east to catch the sunrise." She smiled, picturing warm lamplight spilling from those windows. They made their way back to Coal Bend for supplies. The town had changed. Some folks still turned away, but others nodded respectfully. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson, who once led the mockery, approached with downcast eyes. She set a heavy sack of flour on the counter. "This here's good for biscuits," she murmured. "You always shared yours, even when—" She trailed off, shame coloring her cheeks. "Much obliged," Sophia said simply, accepting both flour and unspoken apology. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across their land, Ephraim set the first foundation logs. The solid thunk of his axe echoed through the trees. Nearby, Sophia tended a cook fire, her clear voice lifted in an old hymn. Ephraim's deeper tones joined in, rough but earnest. Fresh snow began falling as she ladled out 2 bowls of stew. "This is ours now," she said softly. "All of it. The land, the work, the hope." Ephraim's calloused hand found hers, squeezing gently. The cabin rose from the snow-covered earth, 1 log at a time. On the 3rd morning, Marcus Wheeler, from the livery stable, rode up leading 2 strong mules. "Thought these might help with the heavy lifting," he said. That afternoon, Tom Burke from the general store arrived with a crate of nails and hinges. Day by day, more townspeople appeared. Women brought quilts and preserves. Men offered tools and labor. Each gift came with halting apologies, met by Sophia's graceful acceptance. Evenings found them by the fire, Heads bent over scripture, Ephraim's voice growing more confident with practice. But the constant labor took its toll. One night Sophia collapsed, fever burning through her. Ephraim carried her to their temporary shelter, terror gripping his heart. "Lord," he prayed aloud, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, "don't take her from me." He tended her through the dark hours, singing broken hymns between prayers. Dawn painted the sky pink when Sophia's eyes fluttered open, clear and aware. "Thank you," she whispered, touching his tear-stained cheek. As winter's grip loosened, the cabin stood nearly complete. Sophia insisted on placing the final crossbeam herself. Ephraim lifted her up, his hands steady at her waist. "This here's our covenant," she declared, settling the beam into place. "Before God, and whatever comes." Ephraim set her down gently, then pressed his lips to her forehead. Tears gleamed in his eyes as he whispered, "Whatever comes." Above them the cabin rose strong and true, a testament to redemption found through faith, labor, and love. Evening settled over the newly finished cabin like a gentle blessing. Fresh-cut pine logs gleamed in the fading light. Sophia stood in the doorway, taking in their handiwork. Every beam and board held memories. Ephraim moved behind her, lighting the oil lamp. Golden light bloomed. "Supper's ready," Sophia said softly, moving to the fireplace. They sat at their new table. Ephraim bowed his head as Sophia said grace. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for this shelter, for your mercy that makes all things new. Amen." Snow began falling outside. Inside, the fire crackled. They ate quietly. Sophia gathered their plates, humming as she worked. Ephraim added wood to the fire. He turned to watch her, his expression soft with wonder. "Still can't believe it's real," he said, his voice rough. "All of it. The cabin, you." She joined him by the fire, settling onto the quilt spread before the hearth. "It's real enough," she answered, reaching for his hand. His fingers interlaced with hers, strong and gentle. Ephraim swallowed hard, gathering courage. His voice trembled with the weight of memory and meaning. "I'd trade everything for one night with you." The words hung in the firelit air, no longer a desperate plea, but a testament to how far they'd come. Sophia's smile bloomed slow and sure as she leaned against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady beneath her cheek. "Now you've got every night, mountain man," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Every single one the Lord gives us." Something tight in Ephraim's chest loosened. Without speaking, they shifted to their knees, hands still clasped. "Lord," Ephraim began, his voice stronger, "thank you for second chances, for showing me there's more to life than running from shadows, for sending me someone to teach me faith again." Sophia's voice joined his. "Thank you for bringing light out of darkness, for turning mourning into dancing, for making a home where there was only wilderness." The fire settled lower. Sophia began to hum, the familiar hymn rising sweet and clear. Ephraim's deeper voice joined in, their harmony a different kind of prayer. When the last note faded, silence settled like a warm blanket. It wasn't the empty silence of lonely mountain nights. This silence hummed with hope, with love made real in wood and stone, and shared faith. They were home, at last. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of courage and hope. Drop a comment below and let us know what part of the world you're watching from. We love hearing from you.